Okay, let's start. I think more people may join us as we go along. It's past 6:30, so it's probably best that we start now. So yeah, hello, and I welcome to everybody to this last installation of this three-part webinar series on grappling with the question of sustainable consumption and production of the global south. My name is Manu Mathai, and I teach at Azim Premji University in India. And I see some names that have been with us for all the other two webinars. So thank you for staying with us through the series. And to anybody who's joining us for the first time, thanks and welcome as well. Our focus today, as you know, is on building knowledge action solidarities, right? And this is in terms of the working group, this is our effort to focus on the question of how to advance sustainable consumption production systems, right? So this is a question that actually came up in previous iterations as well. How do you move in this direction? A key thread to emerge in our conversations thus far, and outlined in our concept note as well, is that the idea of inequality enabled by injustice is a driving force of unsustainable production consumption systems. So if that's the case, the question we ask is how to address injustice and how to scrutinize and interrogate its production at the sites of accumulation, extractivism, obsessive productivity, precarity of labor, manufactured aspirations, etc., right? All of these, which are only possible because costs can largely be dislocated onto some other distant society or nature. Redressing this injustice ejects us from the comfort of academic discussions, obviously, and also of translating knowledge for policymakers. I'm being a little provocative there. And here's why. On September 25th, a right to information activist in India, Mr. Vipin Agarwal, who was 45 years old, which is Saturday last, right, was murdered, allegedly murdered by the land mafia in the state of Bihar. And he's obviously not alone. Just in the state of Bihar, since the year 2006, 20 such right to information activists have been murdered in very suspicious circumstances. This is the unsettling reality of interrogating production consumption systems. What is crucially needed, therefore, is solidarity between communities of knowledge and action. And may I also say, a certain dissolution of the boundaries to co-produce knowledge and action. And that's obviously the million-dollar question, or whatever question, how do we build such solidarities, right? And that's where I will leave it. And I'll hand it over now to the panelists, who I'll introduce in just a moment. I'm very grateful to our panel today for accepting this invitation. Over many decades, they have all bridged knowledge and action to advance justice at the complex intersection of development, power, and sustainability. Each of them is more than eminently qualified to help us with this question. Let me highlight a few facets of their work, and I would obviously encourage you to follow up and learn more about them and their work at leisure. KJ Joy, as he's called, KJ Joy. Joy is the founding member and currently a senior fellow at the Society for Promoting Participative Ecosystem Management, which is based out of Pune in India. He has been an activist researcher for more than 35 years, working on people's rights to natural resources at grassroots and policy levels. He was a visiting fellow with the erstwhile Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Environment and Development at Bangalore, and a Fulbright fellow at the University of California at Berkeley. Joy coordinates the Forum for Policy Dialogue on Water Conflicts in India, a network that engages with various types of water conflicts in the country. He is also part of Vikalp Sangam, translates roughly as Alternatives Confluence, which is a network of organizations engaged in alternatives in different sectors. His latest co-edited books include Split Waters, The Idea of Water Conflicts, India's Water Futures, Emergent Ideas and Pathways, and from 2017, Alternative Futures, India Unshackled. So welcome, Joy. Thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Rasigan Maharaj. Rasigan is an activist scholar who is based in South Africa, having occupied leadership roles in both mass democratic and national liberation movements. He served as national coordinator of the Science and Technology Transition Program of the first post-apartheid government in South Africa. After his deployment as head of policy at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, he is the founding chief director of the Institute for Economic Research on Innovation of Schwane in the University of Technology since 2004. Sorry if I messed that pronunciation, Rasigan. From 2014, he has served as the node head of the Department of Science and Technology and National Research Foundation Center of Excellence in Scientometrics and Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy. Rasigan holds a PhD in Political Economy and Research Policy from Lund University in Sweden. Our next speaker is Nemo Bassi. Nnimmo is the director of the Health of Maharajh Foundation and member of the steering committee of Oil Watch International, a network resisting the expansion of fossil fuel extraction in South Africa. Nnimmo was chair of Friends of the Earth International from 2008 to 2012 and executive director of Nigeria's Environmental Rights Action from 1993 to 2013. He was a co-recipient of the 2010 Right Livelihood Award and also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. In 2012, Nnimmo received the Rafter Human Rights Award. In 2014, he received Nigeria's national honor as member of the Federal Republic in recognition of his environmental activism. He's also a member of the Action Research Network for Wellbeing Economy in Africa. He's trained as an architect very early in his life. And also he's also a poet with 2 anthologies called, interestingly enough, We Thought It Was Oil, but It Was Blood, and I Will Not Dance to Your Beat. And he's also published is the author of 2 books, To Cook a Continent, Destructive Extraction and the Climate Crisis in Africa, and Oil Politics, Echoes of Ecological War. Nnimmo blogs at Eti Uwem. Nnimmo, I hope that's a correct pronunciation, which means good living. Okay, welcome, Nnimmo. And
thank you, yes.
Our next speaker is Yvonne Yanez, who is a very pleasant surprise. Yvonne just confirmed this morning. So I must also, this is also by way of explaining that I haven't had enough time to research her biography. So it's a much briefer biography. It was a bit of a busy day today. So my apologies in advance for that. But nevertheless, Yvonne is a founder member of Action Ecologia and Oil Watch International. She is a biologist and an eco-feminist. And over the past 25 decades, Yvonne has worked on climate issues. More recently, Yvonne has started to focus on energy and the green economy. And Yvonne is based in Ecuador. And Yvonne, if there's anything you wish to add at this moment, please do so. Okay, thank you. All right. And before I hand it over to Joy, just a few house rules. Each speaker has 10 minutes to offer their opening remarks. And then we'll open it up to a Q&A from the audience, and roughly, I guess, 30 odd minutes. And then our hope is to have about 10 minutes at the end for the speakers to share amongst themselves, to offer quick concluding thoughts, right? So that's the plan. All right. And finally, just a disclaimer, I must point out that these webinars are being recorded and they will live on YouTube for a long while. So please, just be aware of that. Yeah, thank you. And can I invite Joy now, please?
Thanks, Manu. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Manu, for getting me into this, and also the organizers for organizing this very interesting 3-episode webinar on an important question. I'm also thankful to Ashish Kothari, my friend and colleague. In fact, he was slated to be the speaker in this session. So since he had some other difficulties, he can't join. So I'm more of a substitute. I'm sure more of a poor substitute to Ashish in this. I should also say that given the time limits and the issues we need to discuss, probably I might paint the issues in a little broader with a broad brush. And I'm sure many of these issues need much more thorough discussion, nuanced understanding and things. So probably the time, and I am suppose this is a beginning of a conversation. So probably some of these issues we can take up in the question answer session or even later after the thing, because most of these issues, I think we are all dealing with, whether we're an academic or an activist in this. I should also say that probably I'll be coming with my own, background in the movement, bit of located basically as a student and later as a movement, very interesting period in India, that is the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. I always call that was the happening period in terms of the movement. And there was a much more fertile engagement between the student community and the social movements or the political movements, and also the academia. So probably I have a bit of hangover of that, and I'm sure that will reflect in what I'm going to say. I attended the second episode of this webinar. I could not attend the first one. And I broadly agree with the type of, what we got presented and discussed. So I broadly agree with that. And I probably might attempt in this session where we are talking about building solidarities across those who are in the knowledge production sphere and those who are in the political action sphere. Probably that's the type of background I'm going to use. A little more precisely, my friend Sharad Lele that day brought out the issue saying that the issue of consumption has to be talked about in the context of equity and social justice. And I think this is an important starting point for me to look at, start my reflections. And I would say that we are basically talking about the structural inequities in the society, structural basis of exploitation and oppression. It can be class, caste, ethnicity, patriarchy, different forms of minorities. All this, I think, or even, all these are important basis of exploitation and injustice in the society. So when we talk about a transformative agenda, we are also talking about transforming these structural basis to some extent. Or even that day, in fact, especially I liked what Miriam brought onto the table. She said that we cannot talk about both production and consumption without looking at capitalist system that appropriates both labor and the rest of nature. I think this is also an important takeaway for me, and probably some of my comments also would have some bearing on this. I would say that in a capitalist system, the nature of production itself is such that it degrades the necessary conditions of production itself. The necessary conditions of production itself. In fact, there's a beautiful passage in Karl Marx in his Capital Volume 1, where he talks about the whole capitalist agriculture and modern industry. It's a very interesting. I'm not going to read out the whole quote. He says that capitalist system as a system concentrates the motive power of society in larger cities, and how that disturbs the whole circulation of matter between humans and soil and things, and how that is, impacting the whole necessary conditions of production itself. Or he also says that it's also a system which robs both the soil and the laborer. In fact, I only read out the last sentence of that. I will put that entire quote in the chat box later. Capitalist production, therefore, develops technology and the combining together of various processes into a social whole only by sapping the original sources of all wealth, that is the soil and the laborer. I think this is an important take when you talk about production and this whole craving for increased productivity and at what cost are we going to do it. And capitalist agriculture is a good example of that. And in India, we talk about the green revolution model of agriculture, which has a whole lot of implications and things. So in today's episode, when we are going to talk about building knowledge and action solidarities, I guess the solidarity is for a radical transformation. I mean, solidarities can be for different things. I go to locate my saying that this is for basically for transformative changes, which we talked about in the last two sessions and things. So in this relationship between the people, I'm going to use both these words a little broadly. When I say academia or academics or researchers, it is basically those who are primarily engaged in knowledge production. And when I talk about activists also, it's a very broad spectrum of people. I mean, in early days in the 70s, when you talk about a full-time activist, we used to call them as the professional revolutionaries. That is one end of the spectrum. And today in the NGO sector also, we call everybody, practitioner, activist and things. So I'm not going to make much of a difference in the sense that this is a wide range of people, though my emphasis would be much more of the political activists or people who are trying to bring in much more radical social transformation through mass movements, mass work, and type of thing. So, but that's the way I'm going to use it. In fact, there's an interesting saying by Karl Marx, which has also impacted me personally. He has said, philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in different ways. The point is to change it. I can say that the philosophers can be maybe substituted by the word academia, researchers, those are in the knowledge production. So for me, this has been a benchmark of whatever I have done in my life, saying that whatever I do, whether as a researcher, whether as an activist, is it going to change, at least contribute to this change or transformation and things. And I think in this engagement, we talk about between the academia and the activists, this could be taken as a benchmark for us to reflect continuously, saying that what we do, whether as an academic or in the policy sphere or in the activist sphere or practitioner sphere, what we are doing, is it actually challenging the structures of exploitation and oppression, and is it anyway at least helping to lead us to transformative change and things. So I know time is very limited, so I'm going to flag a few issues. In fact, I would agree that this engagement between the academia and the activists is desirable, and is also a necessary condition for the type of change which you have been talking about and things. But this is not easy. There are tensions between the academia and the activists. There's an element of suspicion, and I'm speaking from my experience in India. I may not know whether that works across other countries. Maybe other speakers, I'm sure they will bring up insights and things about it. And there's a bit of a mutual tension and suspicion about, and especially this is more from the activist side to the academia. And there are reasons for it. It's not that these, long-standing suspicion is not without any material basis or anything. There are. So we need to engage with some of these constraints and issues when you talk about how do you build this, solidarities and things. One thing I am very sure that in the solidarity building or alliance building, probably it is not the academia or the researchers who are going to be in the lead, because there are a whole lot of reasons today for that. And I think that lead need to come from the social movements, and probably they need to set the agenda to a great extent for this setting this. In India, we are seeing, I'm sure this is again discussed earlier, the whole institutional space to do any meaningful work as in the knowledge production is highly shrinking. I'm sure there are, stories after stories where politically conscious academic, researchers or teachers either have been thrown out of such institutions. There are a whole lot of cases, or many of them are today in the jails and things. Even institutions which we thought are very close to what we are talking today, we are also seeing that either politically conscious researchers are being sidelined, or they're also forced in a way to leave those institutions and things. So I think there's a crisis, institutional crisis, to do meaningful academic work and type of thing. And one of the issues, I think, that how do we regain these spaces is an important thing. The second issue, I think that there is an overall, after the 90s, we find most of the academic institutions and higher education institutions got an overall order of neoliberalism, which is actually dictating the agenda of knowledge production and things. Which was not the case in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s. We find that the agenda was rather different. There was much more creative engagement with the social movements. And also there was movements outside, much more toiling people's movements outside. There was much more engagement in things. Today, we don't find it. The third element of is that today academia is judged by the number of publications you have. This whole craziness for publications. Unless you change this, and more the publications, and you get promotions, your increments, and a whole lot of assessments are based on publications. I think my academia friends should be able to challenge this, saying that we should have a different way of assessing our contribution to society, both in terms of knowledge production, whether that knowledge production, as Marx said, whether it's leading to any change and things cannot be. So there are issues of that type, which I think the academia need to deal with internally. If they are to engage more meaningful with this type of solidarity, we need to talk about and things. Increasingly, I also find that there is an unwillingness from the academia, and by and large, and there are exceptions, there are interesting exceptions, to engage with the field, quote unquote field, with the people or the type of thing. Is more now digital world. You can sit at your computer terminal and churn out models and other type of things. You can produce knowledge without even engaging with the society at large and things. So I think these are internal questions the academia need to question and put pressure internally. How do you change these systems internally so that they can engage much more meaningfully with societal issues and contribute to change and things. And also I find that the whole research agenda to some extent, the type of knowledge which is produced, it is also overwhelmingly neoliberal in its oral outreach. We find a whole lot of studies about valuation. You value the entire nature, which is ethical or not, that's a different issue, but there are a whole lot of numbers being churned out saying this is the value of a particular ecosystem service. There are people busy with all that. Or the latest is, for example, payment for ecosystem services. What should be the value for that? And political or policy decisions being made on the basis of these numbers today, all lot of things. So I think these are some of the issues we like to point out coming from the academia or the research community, saying that there are issues of this fundamental nature we need to question. And I do consider that academia or people who are in the world of ideas or knowledge production has a bit of a relative autonomy from the state. Now, are we exercising this relative autonomy? This is my question. And very often in the Indian context, I find by and large, the academia don't exercise the relative autonomy. They work more like bureaucrats in the educational system or the research system and things. So this is one thing. I also find that on the other end of the spectrum, when I talk about activists, there are also very issues. This is what, again, I want to go back to the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. There's an increasing NGOization, which I call in the activist field. People are into projects and funded projects and type of a thing. And there is very little mass movements and things. I'm not saying that there are not. There are new movements coming up, or climate change has become an important issue of rallying youngsters into this. But many of these movements have not been able to reach out to the toiling masses or talk a language which can engage with those issues and things. And most of the left movements, Dalit movements are all out of the spectrum of this environmental discourse which is taking place around this. So I'm not being critical about it, but I'm saying that probably we need to see how do you engage with these groups and things. And also, I believe that there are new issues which is coming up. I mean, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, we are rather clear, what is a revolution going to be. We thought revolution is going to be around the corner. And all the left parties or communist parties or groups had their own, whole blueprint ready in terms of what a revolution going to be, what a post-revolutionary society should look like and things. But that dream is crashed. Maybe the collapse of the Soviet Union or China going the capitalist, the state capitalist way of thing, or even with after the 90s, the states changing their role, to become a more of a, let's say, or the shrinking space of the state, or the changing role in terms of from a provider to more of a regulatory state. These are new realities. And along with that, we also find new movements coming up in the whole question of contribution of feminist movements, or the Dalit movements in India, or the environmental movements which came up in the 80s and 90s. They also came up with the new issues which to be addressed. So it also forced the radical groups to go beyond the class issues to some extent, engage with all these issues and things. And then we have the climate change or Anthropocene, which is also unfolding on things. So I think there's a whole lot of new issues which is unfolding among us, which activists or the movements need to engage with. And I think this is an area, it's a space, I think, where the engagement of the academia who are in the knowledge production or the intelligentsia and the activists need to come together. We need to build new theories around this, and we need to build new programs, both in terms of short-term and the long-term, what I call a transformative program, how they're linked to each other. I think this is a task which we need to do together. It is something which we need to co-produce and things. I think this is one space I think we need to use. Similarly, there are also very concrete or specific examples where the movements are coming out or trying to push the state into doing certain things where we need inputs from the knowledge communities. Now, for example, I'm involved in one issue here where the local movements have been forced the government to restructure a huge public irrigation system or more equitable, more democratic lines. Now, this needs support from different sections. I mean, we need support from different type of hydrologists. We need different type of institutional building people. So this is also area where this was my question to my academic friends is that will you not share some time which may not be paid for? So you need to make certain unpaid for time to engage with what is happening on the ground is an important thing. So there are a whole lot of other things which are unfolding in this. So the other issue which I would like to flag, I mean, there are a whole lot of new scenario which is emerging. even among the activist circle, which need new engagement. And I think that is where I think the academia and the activists or the people who are in the social movements need to engage with in a much more open-minded manner. One of the basis of suspicion of the activists on the academia has been that very often when we do the knowledge production, the type of interest which we carry, the type of worldviews which we bring in, or the type of normative concerns underpinning this type of research and the knowledge production is never made very clear to people. So people have very, and we come up with very neoliberal solutions to various type of things. So this is also something internally we need to critique if you have to build what I call a platform where this type of engagement can be possible and things. So my appeal is that we need to make a new beginning. We need to reconfigure this engagement in a much more critical, radical manner. For that, we need to open up spaces in the academic institutions and things to, and there's an internal struggle which we need to. In fact, it also reminds me of a very interesting experiment we did when I was working in the mass movement in Maharashtra. I mean, we were working in the drought-prone region, drought-affected people and things. And there, the toiling peasantry took out a demonstration on the nearest university, saying that you are the university, you are the seat of wisdom and knowledge production. What is the type of knowledge you're churning out? Is drought not an important issue for you? So if you cannot do the research, the farmers are going to enter your library and we are going to do our own research. That forced the university to open up a drought cell there. All the concerned departments joined together the movement and we had a joint search. So I think there is also pressure we need to build by the movement on the academic institutions to reorient the type of research they do. And finally, my appeal is that we need to find time to engage with the field, engage with the people. In fact, in the earlier traditions, in any political group, those who are earning used to contribute some money for the upkeep of the full-time activists and things. Now, can we academics who are quite well paid in India make part of your incomes to these type of support these social movements and things? Today, we all know, because the government is coming up very heavily on many of the social movements or other groups, heavily because they're cutting down funding or other type of support systems and things. So we need to set up alternative supportive systems and things. So if you can put part of your disposable incomes to support activist groups and movements and type of thing, probably your own conceptions will come down to that extent. And also probably it will be big, this or even to meet the basic needs of activist community and type of thing. Today, there's a real crisis in that. And similarly, I would say that at least about 5 to 10% of your time to set aside this for this engagement. Otherwise, I don't think this engagement can take off and things. And finally, I'm just stopping. Yeah, just 1 minute.
Okay.
Finally, we also need to create spaces for this co-production or engagement. And one example which in India we have started is, which Manu mentioned, is Vikalpa Sangam, or what you call this alternatives confluence. It is a space which is created for this type of creative engagement among practitioners, among activists, among themselves to share and critically reflect the type of work do, and also engage with the academic community. Of course, this needs to be deepened. There are issues in it. We need to bring in much more explicitly politically oriented activists into the discussion. Similarly, we need to also do much more analytically critical work and things and get in things. But I think that's a beginning which you have made, and I would suggest that all of you should stay connected or create similar platforms where this engagement can be done. Manu, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks, Joy. Thanks for an excellent set of issues that you flagged. Maybe I'll invite Rasigan now to take it from here.
Thank you very much. And thanks so much, Joy. What a wonderful presentation. I also want to recognize the organizers for including me in this program. And Manu, thanks for such a generous introduction. I hope what I'm about to share, reciprocates the generosity itself. As Joy had mentioned, I'm sorry, Joy, I lack one of the decades of experience, but I did try to catch up from the 80s onwards. So I hope some of that comes through. Just another point, if you don't mind, in a sequence between what I want to share with you. A point made by Joy, and it's so important because it comes up consistently. this question of our relative autonomy. And I want to posit and hopefully come back to it in concluding times, that we must maintain autonomy from government, but we need to embrace the state. And I hope this is a challenging point, and I will return to it at the end to explain why I framed it in that way. And I hope not to use too many Marxian quotes around alienation on this point itself. All right, colleagues. So I want to start with a little bit of a paradox. And, I think the work that Manu and the colleagues from Future Earth have put together is really excellent. The grounding notes and the 5 questions you shared with us did provide some direction. So I hope I'm going to be answering in that format itself. The United Nations has designated tomorrow, 29th of September, as the International Day of Awareness on Food Loss and Waste Reduction. So the multilateral institution, Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, then provides some data about tomorrow. Globally, around 14% of food produced is lost between harvest and retail, and significant quantities of this food that we produce is wasted in retail and consumption. So they estimate about 17% of total global food produced is wasted. So food is lost and wasted, but it's not just the nutrition that's going away. FAO adds to this by saying that nearly 38% of our total energy usage is in the production of food. So when we are talking about that wastage, we have to factor in also the sunk energy costs behind the food, especially produced through commercial agriculture. Now, the contrast to tomorrow being the International Day of Awareness on Food Loss and Waste Reduction is from non-governmental organizations, and they designate World Hunger Day on the 28th of May. Now, in contrast to what the UN is focusing our attention on tomorrow, on the 28th of May, just earlier this year, NGOs suggest that nearly 700 million people live in chronic hunger. 60% of those are women. It was estimated that nearly 130 million people have been added to that number because of COVID-19. So, 98% of those in those conditions of chronic hunger and undernourishment live in what's categorized as low and middle income countries. In other words, what Manu, you and the colleagues designate as the global south. And it's quite important us confronting this empirical definition of our material realities, because often we get caught up in ideological framings just rhetorically. We are hungry, you are full, you are overeating, we are not. But once you start looking at the absolute waste generated by this system that we subscribe to, and I think it's very important, Joy and colleagues, that we name it as the capitalist mode of production. Because this is not coming from a spaceship hovering above us, transmitting these institutional forms. It's of our making. And because of that, it also contains the seeds of its unmaking. I hope you don't mind the pun on the word seeds in this context, talking about food, awareness of the wastage, but at the same time recognizing hunger that stalks most of the peoples of our societies. And to give you a framing of context for ourselves in South Africa, and this was just from a few months back, 10 million adults and 3 million children acknowledge experiencing hunger. It's estimated that nearly 2.5 million adults and 600,000 children are experiencing perpetual hunger, almost on a day-to-day basis. So I remind colleagues that South Africa is a society in which capitalism is not working, because more than 50% of the population is outside of that wage relationship that defines capitalism itself. When you have more than 50% of your society unemployed, can we still call it a capitalist system? I leave that as a moot point. Maybe there's colleagues that can do the calculation. But if more than 50% of your society is outside of the framing relationship, we need to be concerned, because we keep getting encouraged to make capitalism work. So if I move on to the first question that you raised, Manu, I think conjoining the work of Amartya Sen and Pierre Bourdieu is very important. And I take what's been emphasized, the notion about indignation and the wrath, but the rage that's building amongst ourselves as we see in world systems, the perpetuation of these inequalities, the injustices being perpetuated by it, and all of this being brought to bear at a point in which ourselves, not as passport carriers, not as flag wavers, but as a species, is being threatened by another life form, another living form, sorry, not a life form. A virus, I've been told, is not a thing in that form. But it is a different form of life on this planet, and it is threatening us. Yet what do we, instead of banding together in cooperation, in solidarity, we wave our flags at each other and hope this is going to save us. No, I'm sorry, colleagues, I'm sure you've seen the World Health Organization has not approved flag waving as a cure for COVID-19. And it is going to doom us because of the consequences. So, a key point in what you raised between Sen and Bourdieu, and I really want us to encourage the view. We need to at least share in the determination of the problem. So I support the idea about us co-constructing solutions, but I really worry that we often don't share a definition of what is problematic. I don't think that it's that from 2008, The Economist magazine, and Joy, you'd remember what Marx called that, or Lenin at least, the magazine of the millionaires. It, for the first time, started calling the system not a free market, but capitalism. And this is quite important. If on the right, or those in favor of capitalism can define it as such, why is it that the left continues to step aside from that definition and vaguely tries to bring about reforms? So in that, we need to take care in defining the problems as well, that we work with communities and break this idea of working on communities. I hope I've made that distinction quite clear. We end up writing the case studies and publishing it in the names of the cases. Colleagues, we are the cases, especially those of us from the Global South. We are writing about ourselves as well. But we tend, because of that, to reproduce the subordination of academics and intellectuals in the Global South. So besides us sometimes becoming co-authors, most of the time we are fitted in as footnotes. And the literatures itself then are designated as area studies. I'm sure colleagues are aware of what I'm raising in this way, as opposed to being about life and death in the society. So we need to recognize these colonialities that continue to characterize academic relationships. And colleagues, I'm not speaking from history here. Just last week, I'm sure colleagues recognize the journal Nature. Very important journal. And I want to quote from it. Just 16% of 24,894 articles published in 20 high-profile development journals between 1990 and 2019 were authored by researchers based in the Global South. But less than 16% of nearly 25,000, compared with 73% authored by researchers in the Global North, and 11% of that was collaborations. So, colleagues, one of the co-authors of that is a person called Griva Chelwa. Yeah, and Chelwa is quoted as saying, "We know there are structural barriers in the world, but once you begin to quantify it in a systemic way, the gravity of the problem really comes home." And I really keep encouraging, we need to put more efforts in detailing the nature of our subordination and exclusion. Unless we do this, we continue to perpetuate the epistemicide of the global South, and we ensure that our communities cannot reclaim the longer histories that bind us together. Moving on to the second question, the question about acknowledging that the social, economic, political, and ecological relationships of our contemporary conjuncture constitute, as it's currently framed, an absolute existential threat to our survival as a species. We have created the frameworks that themselves threaten us today. But we are unable to step forward and accept the responsibility. I mean, these were our ancestors that put these frameworks into place. But we are the progeny. And it's up to us, as much as an intergenerational change, to recognize that this system should not be perpetuated. Yeah? We need to encourage a return to a more fundamental research question about the origins of these inequalities, injustices, and precarities. Colleagues, we know the answers. We've been talking to each other about it, but we've not framed it as the global South responding to the global North that perpetuates. Yeah? In class society, academics do not occupy a neutral position. This we know very well. Yeah? But something we sometimes fail to acknowledge is fence sitting is taking a position, even if it is taking it on the fence. Yeah. We must recognize, because of that, our own complicity and culpability of academia acting in the service of those that rule us. It's difficult, but unless we do that, it's quite, how can I say, disingenuous to seek solidarity with communities and activists, expressing solidarity and compassion when we refuse to acknowledge the very thing that's creating the problems that people are experiencing. Yeah. It may not be our individual work, but collectively, as I would say a guild within class society, we collectively contribute to the misery and immiserization of our peoples. So hegemony of capitalist relations of production accelerates our alienation. We must really be encouraged to reclaim our species being consciousness. Just to remind people about this here. You know, as a species being, plurality, dynamicism, all of these are important components in an ecological sense. You know, these are not negative qualities. These are qualities, if we embrace, can add value to our existence. It comes with the recognition of each and the value that comes from that. It can rebuild our interconnections. But the bureaucratic institutional frameworks that regulate our interactions, you know, Joy had used a few terms. I would also add to this the so-called audit society that we are part of. And we are all measured to these finite, quantitative, or quantifiable aspects. Life may not constitute that, no matter how much we applaud the mathematics and the sciences behind it. Yeah, our performance, because we make use of the surplus extracted from the exploitation of labor, demands on us a performance that includes our accountability to society. Yeah, Joy, it's not that we have extra money. Our monies, the monies we earn, come from the exploitation of workers. That's the surplus being redistributed through us. And if we serve to perpetuate the bondage that people find themselves in, then of course we cannot expect activists and communities to trust us. Yeah. We need to put a lot more emphasis on re-legitimizing the scholarly praxis. You know, colleagues, we often forget the third mission of the university is community engagement. Maybe at this existential point, we need to turn it on its head. Without community engagement, we should not tolerate either research or teaching and learning that's not informed by working with society. I don't think working against society constitutes that, but Nnimmo and others well know. Scholars, scientists, engineers attached to the very firms that are digging out the fossil remains of those that came before us, had already known about climate change. Joy, in the same decades that you mentioned, it was never in the textbooks that I saw, but so we need to do that as well, because our re-engagement must be towards rebuilding that trust. So I'm coming to the last two points, if that's all right, Manu. I hope this doesn't sound too glib, but having seen the earlier incarnations of just the previous two webinars, I want to make three very simple points about how academics from the Global South and Global North can build the solidarity. Number one is, and I'm sorry, especially for colleagues from the subcontinent, humility helps. There was a chap that left South Africa that helped India attain its national liberation. He made this point quite often. Humility helps. We need to downplay the hubris that we surround ourselves in, that we actually immerse ourselves in sometimes to make ourselves stand out in the societies that we are part of. We need to relegate this arrogance and privilege that seems associated with the titles and honorifics that sometimes precede us. Colleagues, I'm shocked. In South Africa, we'd gone through a cycle where most of these were thrown away because we had the wonderful character of Madiba, the first president of South Africa, that was not tied to all of these suits. I'm using that definitely. He didn't want us to wear suits. Today, often I am told, where is your tie before I'm let into venues? This is shocking, and this is our retrogression as well. We must also then commit to rebuilding productive capabilities, capacities, and competences. Colleagues, the vaccine apartheid, which is global, which we are inside, shows us how important it is. I want to, again, play on a framing. Stephen Bantu Biko, one of the, a brilliant intellectual and leader in South Africa, in leading the Black consciousness movement, argued, Black man, you are on your own. To tell us we have to struggle for what we want ourselves. I want to turn this a little. People of the South, we are on our own. This vaccine apartheid has proven it, absolutely. India, which produces elements, is red listed. And this is not a positive red listing, Joy, as you well know, from the UK government. So, by conclusion, the crisis, contradictions, and potential catastrophes emerging as consequences of perpetuating global capitalism offers all academics and public intellectuals the opportunity to contribute to a more equal, just, and resilient world system by working with people. We have to factor in redressing this epistemicide of the Global South. It remains an unfinished project, and in it, a longer narrative about human solidarity and how we evolved prior to the advent of colonialism and the subsequent neo and other forms of colonialism that we still live through. It tells a different story. The Indian Ocean Rim countries have a very different story to tell than the Atlantic Rim stories, but which is the one that's dominant in the narratives of history being told. Through that, we hopefully can revise our perspectives, rethink the paradigms. What is crucial? What is critical? Joy, I like what you said earlier, and I want to reframe that. What is socially useful at the edge of our existence? I'm sure you're not going to be able to eat, whether it's cryptocurrencies or others. Money doesn't feed you. And then the last one for me. This reconnection, I think, has to be principled on solidarity and working together. We're 7.9 billion people on this planet. We cannot continue. In the flyer, Manu, that you shared, which I shared with people as well, you have an image of people lying next to parked vehicles. This is the world that we live in. In South Africa, we build accommodation for those vehicles. They are called garages. We put our vehicle safely inside the garage, lock the door. The garage has lighting, it has warmth, it has comfort. Yet immediately on the doorstep, just outside there, we have people sleeping in the open. This cannot continue, colleagues. So I hope, thanks very much for the opportunity created, Manu, and I hope that gives us issues to engage with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rasigan. I'm going to quickly move on to Nnimmo, please.
Thank you so much. It's been a fantastic session so far, and I want to thank Joy and Rasigan for presentations. I just wonder whether we should just close up the meeting now, but I would like to listen to my friend Yvonne. So I'll take this space in between. I find the conversation so extremely stimulating because we really need to build solidarity and also work with communities and not on communities. And I like that saying that humility helps. And this is what we really need as one of the key factors that will help us to build solidarity. One of the big challenge I see when I look at the development co-production of knowledge from the academia, as well as those of us who are on the streets and the academia on the street, of course, is that we have to always understand that knowledge is very closely tied to power and culture. And for us to understand that useful knowledge must respond, of course, to the needs of the people. And the problems that we have is that most researchers, Rasigan just showed us the fact that about the quantities of research published by Global South researchers in some journals, selected journals, standing at just 17%. And something I found this expressed in reality, where somebody from the Global South visits my territory, my community, spends a week and then goes back and becomes an expert of my community. I find that, and this is quickly published in books and journals and becomes a reference point. Ignores the reality, because the reality on the ground ignores the knowledge on the ground. And over the years, because of this kind of tilted generational sharing of knowledge, the world has got to a point of believing that transformation of nature, of resources, must be for consumption. And then the locations where these resources are extracted and extracted for transformation do not necessarily share in the benefits of the extracted goods, but rather are treated as sacrificial zones. And so the essence of co-produced knowledge that ought to empower or to provide the space for the communities that are being exploited is blunted by a conscious deflection away from the knowledge that is embedded in the system, in the locations of exploitation. This is not only beyond the fact of access to spaces for sharing knowledge and through publications. Research funding equally creates a lot of problems. In many of our research institutions, the funding cost is based on profit motive and not necessarily for production to satisfy the utility or necessities of the people who should benefit from such research. And so we have research institutions that are, at least in my context, that don't address the needs of local farmers, but rather seeks to propagate the interests of modern biotechnology companies or big agribusiness that seeks to propagate the needs of artificial inputs rather than the actual needs of those who are feeding us. And I do agree again with Rasigan when he said that money doesn't feed us. Although he didn't elaborate on that, I believe that he meant that we are fed by farmers who are working, laboring on the ground, who are adding to the soil, who are concerned about the health of the soil, and therefore producing the things that feed us. And so the critical need of research and knowledge generation for the construction of a post-consumerist or post-capitalist infrastructures is very highly diminished. And this should be if we build solidarities between researchers in the global north and the researchers in the global south, we should be able to bridge this gap and to align research and popularize research to help us generate the kind of infrastructure that we need to overturn the current system of exploitation and destruction of our ecological resources. And so the politics of knowledge and power is so important for us to be able to deconstruct the kind of system that ignores indigenous wisdom, that ignores grassroots wisdom, and that refuses to listen for lack of humility, to listen to what the people really want. This is one of the things that is, one of the realities that is empowering and instructing us in our schools on the streets, schools in the village square, that the time has come for us to consciously sit down in all humility to listen to the wisdom of the aged, wisdom of our elders, especially for young people. Being in the classrooms, very important to listen to our professors, very important, can't do without that. We also have to go back and sit down under the big baobab trees, under the iroko trees, and listen to the wisdom of the elders, the wisdom about how they live within planetary limits. Yesterday, I was in a community where there was a celebration marking the World Day of International of Rivers. And one of the elders said that when he grew up, he found that there was a rule in his community, which is by the bank of a river, that no one should build anything closer than 500 meters from the river bank. And what was the reason for that? To defer to the health of the river, to stop waste from being dumped into the river. But today, our waterways are seen as waste dumps. The ocean is the waste dump. Factories willingly pump their effluents into the ocean, because when they look at the ocean, it looks so limitless, so large and limitless. You can dump anything there, you can extract whatever you want there. The ocean is never going to finish because the ocean is limitless. And this is a limitation of human thinking, because if the oceans can fit on planet Earth, then it has limits, definitely. It has limits. And so getting to go back to our roots, not in a romantic sense, but to learn, to sit down quietly and learn, for young people to keep down their mobile phones for a moment, learn from the wisdom of the elders, and then perhaps go back to the mobile phones and share that wisdom on social media and other platforms in classrooms. Challenge some of the things that we are taught, that young people are learning from schools, with the practical realities of what is needed and the wisdom that can save this planet, that can save humans, because the planet can do without humans. The wisdom that can save humans and make the planet habitable for humans. We can see the negation of reality in the way climate science is moving, the direction of climate science, especially the science that fits public action. When the United Nations Framework for Convention on Climate Change, through its intergovernmental panel, issues a report on what may be taken as the latest climate science, what we see is not the need for us to do the simple things like keeping fossils in the ground, but rather promotion of technology, that technology is the way to suck carbon from out of the atmosphere. Yesterday, I read a report that said they've just the biggest carbon absorbing factory or equipment or establishment has just been set up. I've forgotten exactly where. It's just been established, but it can suck up to 4,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And that is just a fraction, less than 3%, maybe less than even 1% of the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And that's what the biggest establishment can suck out in a year. It's not enough it's just a fraction of what is produced in a day, rather. What can be sucked in a year doesn't make any dent on what is produced in a year, in a day. That really shows that we have to go back to very basic wisdom, keeping the fossils in the ground. And you know, when we look at the questions being posed about, sometimes people talk about population as a big contributor to global warming. Then and when they do that, the finger is pointing towards Africa. But when you look at the records, Africa has not contributed more than maybe 3% of the entire amount of carbon emissions in the atmosphere. So where is the argument about? What we have to weigh our arguments with reality. And the reality is about what is really affecting our people, not what corporations want us to know or want to hear. Look at the legal framework for fighting global warming, especially as illustrated by the Paris Agreement. Rather than asking for real legally binding emission reduction, science gets suspended when it's convenient. And nations are asked to nationally determine what they're going to contribute, nationally determine what they're going to contribute to emission reduction, not according to science, but what is politically convenient. Knowledge is suspended. We are willing now, we're celebrating the Paris Agreement because if all the countries say we agree
is to make college easier because students have a lot on their. Oh, sorry, coach.
And that is because.
Like Harper and
And that, I don't know what
sorry about that. Yeah, someone.
All right, thank you. So I found that very interesting interruption. Anyway, so I'm rounding up now. I was just taking a look at the Paris Agreement that allows nations to do whatever they like, rather than assigning the polluting nations, industrialized nations, binding emission reduction targets. And so the same United Nations that allow the liberty of countries to do whatever they want to under the NDCs are now telling us that what is on the table is going to lead the world not to well below 2 degrees Celsius temperature increase of 1.5 above pre-industrial levels, but up to 2.7. 2.7 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level in the next few years would mean setting Africa on fire, setting the world on fire. We're seeing wildfires, crazy floods. We're going to see more of that just because politicians find it easier to suspend knowledge and do what is politically expedient. And so my final thoughts is that knowledge generated, and so to build solidarity, for us to build solidarity must be tackled from the position that consumption, when nations hold consumption levels as a marker of growth or progress, we are simply moving in the direction of destruction. A world cornered into fetishizing growth and development would not give us a planet that is conducive for human habitation and for other species that we share this planet with. Which means that we have to we must utilize our knowledge in a more vigorous manner to very clearly ignore or reject prescriptions from international financial institutions like the World Bank, like the IMF, like the WTO, that makes vulnerable nations to dismantle safety nets, remove public investment in productive activities, shrink governments, and promote the private sector, private corporations. and turn governments into shoe-shining entities for corporate interest. We have to keep our eyes on the policies and knowledge that would help us, help our countries regain the higher ground in determining what our goals are in going to the future. We had the MDGs up to 2000, it didn't work. We have the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals up to 2030, and we need to devise ways to subvert these goals in a way that will become positive. Otherwise, we're soon going to have from the future development goals that will still take us deeper into the hole, just as we see ongoing at the present. And I'll take a pause here so that I can listen to the exciting presentation coming from Yvonne.
Thanks, Nnimmo. All right. Yvonne, over to you, please. We are a little tight on the clock today, but go ahead.
Thank you very much, Manu. And I don't know if my presentation will be exciting. Is my sound okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, sorry, because I thought that I confirmed a few days ago, and I didn't know that you just received my reconfirmation this morning during my night. Anyway, I am here, and thank you very much for all the presentations that were very, very interesting, very, very good, and I learned a lot. And I would like also to greet in all the organizers of these webinars. I couldn't be attending the others too because I was too busy. And I want to say hello to Nnimmo, of course, to Ashish that is not here, but of course to Rasigan and also to Joy and Manu, of course. I am Yvonne Yanez from Acción Ecológica, Ecuador, in South America. And I am going to talk, I think that the topic of this webinar is very, very important to talk about consumption in the global south. Because of course we always talk about the industrialized northern countries are the responsible for all the unsustainable consumption, which is certainly a problem, of course, for the planet. But also the South must also assume its responsibility. As Nnimmo said, of course that the global South is responsible of a fraction of what is, for example, in terms of climate change of carbon emissions. But these do not put the global South without a responsibility. And I think that in terms of consumption is exactly the same. But I think that this analysis of consumption and knowledge action agenda and this appropriate vocabulary that we need to use for that could be approached at least through three perspectives that I think that now I can share with you. These three ideas of how can we talk and debate about this. The first approach is from a political perspective. And I would like to talk from my position in the universe, in America Latina, in Ecuador, in the Andes. And I would like to talk about what happened very briefly with the progressive governments that we have in America Latina since 15 years ago. I think that these governments particularly encourage consumption as a public policy, as an ideology. And the aim was to turn the middle class, not as a political actor, but as a consumers group of people, and completely empty of what was before as a political actor, as an important group of people that used to take action when we do not like some governments and many other things. So the middle class in Ecuador during the Correa government and later on until now became like a huge bunch of people consuming things. But not only in the middle class. A few years ago, Frei Beto, that is very well known, this Brazilian thinker, was in Ecuador. And he was sharing with us that, for example, during the Lula's government, tens of thousands of families in the favelas, that is the poorest neighborhoods in Rio de Janeiro and in other cities in Brazil, consumed top-of-the-line telephones, huge televisions, but they did not have access to the full satisfaction of their fundamental rights. And this was part of this ideology that through consumption, we will achieve this inclusion of the people in the markets and of course in capitalism. And yeah, this is the first approach that I wanted to share. The second one, the one was the political, the second is the social approach, and has to do with the relationship of people's societies with capital, with the money, and with credit. In my parents' generation, it was almost a condemnation to know that you have to ask for a loan for anything that you need. And the peasant people, the campesinos, they know that being in debt, whether to the landowner or to the bank, was a fatal destiny for their crops, for their families, for their lives. But in the last 20 years, much has changed. Today, access to credits is a question of status and economic power. We see, for example, in the countryside, in Ecuador, in the rural areas, that even among the demands of the campesino, the peasant organization, is included the access to credit, to consume agrochemicals, to buy machines, etc. And the more credit you have access to, the more successful you are as a campesino or as a peasant. So this change of mentality that was forced, of course, by the capital and by the international financial institutions and the national financial institutions like the government, is so important to think as a global South consumption. I remember that when I was living in Peru, the minimum wage was on that moment like 300 soles, like $100. And if you have $100 as a minimum wage, you can already have a credit card, and the bank gave you this credit card. So this is completely is a craziness to think that the indebtedness is seen like a right, finally, for most of the population. The third thing that I wanted to mention, the third approach, comes from, of course, from the political ecology. And this has to do, as the rationale of the webinars that I was reading the other day, we cannot separate the relationship between consumption and production. Thus, we have this phenomenon, first of all, of dislocation between the product that we are consuming and its origin. It's a situation that, of course, is increasingly present in all of the countries in the world, of course, and in Ecuador too. And here, particularly, is due to maybe, or for example, on one hand, to the growing distance between the rural areas and the cities. And on the other hand, to the impoverishment of the popular classes, of course, who for reasons of survival prefer to consume whatever and wherever it comes from, as long as it's cheaper, clothes or food. So we have, for example, a flood of extremely cheap manufactured goods from China. or even, of course, subsidized foodstuffs that comes from the United States, or now from France. The other day I was seeing apples that cost 10 cents or 20 cents coming from France, apples. But of course, the Chilean apples or the Ecuadorian apples even costs 3 times more. So of course, people is going to buy all of these things that come more cheaper. And also, I think that this relation with production has to do also with what we have seen during the last 15 years in Ecuador. This augmentation of consumption, including the energy, the number of cars, etc., in Ecuador. At the same time, we see a rate of expansion of the agro-industrial, agro-export industrial farming, the oil or mining frontier, extractivism in general, of mining of oil, open pit mines, more hectares of oil palms, etc. So I think that in capitalism, these go together, at least in countries like in America Latina. Finally, I would like to talk about these provocative questions that were put for us as panelists, and all my colleagues that intervened before answered very, very well. And one is how to do about this co-production of knowledge and action, and this relation between academia, activism, social organizations, etc. I think that we have, first of all, to work of what is called in Brazil, for example, Paulo Freire, about this educación liberadora, education for freedom, in all the sense, and also to be free of consumerism. And in the case of Ecuador, and other countries, of course, and India for sure, should be based in plurinationality. I mean, we are not only one country, we are one state with at least 14 different nationalities. In the case of Ecuador, probably in India, I don't know how many, much more for sure. And I think that it's so important to understand that if we don't break with this imposition of what happened in the last 15 years in Ecuador, for example, of this meritocracy. I mean, here you have to have, as probably everywhere, a PhD, a master's, a title or a license, so you can obtain a job, so you can have a status, and so you can have a loan. Also, of course, because during the past 15 years, so many young people that went to universities and have jobs in the state could buy, for example, an apartment. And now we have thousands of apartments empty with a bank that took them because there is a crisis and no one can pay anymore the loans of this credit. So we have a crisis also of housing here. Also, I think that this meritocracy is completely unjust and irrespectful of the plurinationality itself. And of course, this will cause, I was listening about the 16% of all the academia resources and articles written by the northern countries and only, no, by southern countries. But I would like to ask, from these 16 or 17% of articles were written by whom in the southern parts of the world? I mean, probably from white men, urban, rich. So also there is a very injustice also in this inside our countries. And finally, I would like to say that I feel a little bit uncomfortable with this term of solidarity, because the solidarity sounds like, you know, like I give you something, and it's contrary of what we aim to have, that is, we are going to build together a change, we are going to build together a new movement, and we are going to build again together our re-existence, but together, not necessarily with solidarity. Yes, I live here and we will continue talking later. Thank you.
Yvonne, thank you so much for being very economical with time. We have only about 10 minutes of official webinar time, but there are obviously, I'd like to give the audience a few opportunity to ask a few questions. I can see Thomas Reuter's hand up. Please go ahead, Thomas.
Yes, I just wanted to pick up on that point about knowledge, action, solidarities, which is the topic of the webinar. And I agree with the second speaker that it's not really, we have to escape the trap of ideologies and ideological or nationalist flag waving. We have to develop new discourses that around which a consensus can be formed for action. And on the other thing I wanted to say is that who can we actually form show solidarity to? And in my understanding, there are two options. One is progressive elites, that is elites who understand the rational need and from a systemic perspective for solidarity, and that means social justice. And there are such elites who certainly in some of the European countries where I live in Germany, there's a certain sector of the elite that carries that model, that you have to have some fairly high degree of social justice to have a prosperous society. So that's one possible solidarity we can show. We can help those progressive elites develop new ways of doing things. The other solidarity I can see that is quite obvious is at the local level. And unfortunately, scientists, academics, do not often have very good ways of connecting to actors at the local level who really making change in villages, in communities, in small towns, in small businesses also. We don't connect very well at the local level with people who are working exactly in the area that we may have knowledge on. And that's something I would like to do something about. That disconnect, I'd like to see that overcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Do we have other questions? Or does anybody on the panel want to respond to what Thomas has just suggested, routes to building solidarity? I take your point as well, Yvonne, about your skepticism about solidarity. Maybe we can introduce a little more skin in the game and say building together, routes to building together, right? And I think we had some very interesting proposals. I think from Joy as well about putting your money in the game, putting your time in the game, and else it gets too little too comfortable, a little too easy, I suppose. Yeah.
Manu, can I just quick response? I'm sure others will respond to this important
question. Yeah.
Thanks, Thomas, for raising this. Let me take your second aspect of the question, saying that there is a serious disconnect at the local level between what the communities of the society and what's happening in the academia, which is very true, actually. And that's an area I think we need to work through because, in my presentation, I was giving an example saying that there is an interesting thing of restructuring a particular irrigation project in a new ways, in ways which are talking about in terms of more socially just and environmentally just and type of thing. But that also brings in the need for new knowledge in terms of how do you actually calibrate the hydrology in terms of bringing in, issues of equity, equitable distribution of water, livelihood as the center, all type of things. So you need that type of engagement today that is not happening. So I think one of the things which we can further discuss is that how do you bring this in into some type of engagement or working relationship with this? And I clearly agree with you that there is a disconnect at that level, at the local level, saying that there is very little academic engagement. In fact, we have all of these academic institutions. We have different type of technical institutes and colleges and other type of thing. But I mean, they're not been able to engage with this. Now, for example, even in a village, for example, if they have to plant the water, if you ask, is there a rain gauge there? Is people reading, oh no, the type of, what is understanding there and things. So can not the science teachers take this up and things? So I think there are different scales at which we can deal with this issue. And how do you build this in? I think that's an important thing you. So the first part of the question, I think, is more problematic for me. In the sense, your proposition is that we leave the ideologies and the national flags. Of course, I do agree that, I don't know, today probably if I say that you leave your national flag, maybe in India, that's a big issue. So I don't want to, I mean, that's an issue. But I don't know, I would say yes and no to the ideology part of it, because the issue is not about ideology leaving and things. I think the issue is that how do you frame, I think Rasigan also brought in, how do you frame the issues? And if you have to solve that particular issue, how do you approach it? Then what is the type of conceptual, theoretical, and other type of thing you have to bring in to analyze and find a solution? So instead of saying that it's an ideological dogma or an ideological issue, then maybe we have to relate to what's the theory which best explains that particular issue. So I think that is how we can be open about it, and also maybe build a consensus or type of a social, this one say, okay, this is a critical issue. This is I mean, this is a type of dream all of us have in terms of a transformative society and type of a thing. Then from there, then that can be the starting point. I mean, ideology need not be the starting point. Very often what happens is conversation don't get deepened because we all start with our own relative ideological positions. So instead of that, we can start with the real world issues, then best see how do we explain things. And that would maybe can come to some type of a collaborative or a solidarity building and things. That's it. I'm sure Rasigan and others will have much more substantive things to say about it. Yeah.
Thanks, Joy. Does do any of the panelists want to jump in on this? If not, maybe I just kind of throw one thing as well, given that I sit in a university. and see, I think, and this is a challenge. How do you deal with incentive structure, right? And I think the warning that Lewis Mumford made many decades ago about quantification without qualification, numbers without values, quantities without values, right? Is applicable not just to an at the epistemological level, the kinds of knowledge that are given credence, but also at the level of the incentives for academics to work, right? So that's a challenge as well. I'm just throwing it out there. Perhaps there are other researchers here who might want to jump in, because that also determines what academics will do and largely what they want, right? Especially if you're a young academic, you don't have the luxury of these conversations. You have to do other things to get on. So yeah, I just want to put that in there. But on a entirely different note, we are past the official time of the event. As you may have just heard, we will wrap up. I guess it's already 8 o'clock. So, but more than happy to continue having a more informal conversation with those who want to stay on, right? But I think it's 8 o'clock, and so I have to wrap up the official conversation. Yeah, thank you. So let me just officially, therefore, thank the panelists for your time and your thoughts, and for accepting our invitation, and also to all the participants who've joined us. Some of them who've joined us for all 3 of the conversations, and the others who've joined us today. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Okay, yeah. So, but we can carry on informally. And
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Ria, maybe I think we can